On April 13th, 2026, just weeks ago, Statistics Canada released its most comprehensive household wealth report of the year. The headline number should have been front-page news across the country. The income gap between Canada's top 40% of households and the bottom 40% reached 46.7 percentage points in 2025, the widest it has been since records began in 1999. The gap has increased every single year since the pandemic began. The top 20% of Canadian households now hold 65.7% of Canada's total net worth, averaging $3.5 million per household. The bottom 40%? They hold 3% of Canada's net worth, averaging $81,650. The wealth gap between the top 20% and the bottom 40% reached 62.7 percentage points at the end of 2025, up 0.6 points from a year earlier and continuing its multi-year climb. These are not numbers from a decade ago. These are the numbers as of right now, published by Statistics Canada on April 13, 2026. And here's the part that makes this video necessary. The people feeling the squeeze most are not the poor. They're the middle. The Canadians who did everything right, worked hard, bought a home, raised a family, paid their taxes, and are watching their financial footing quietly erode underneath them. This video explains why, what the structural forces are, what the data actually says about where the middle class is going, and most importantly, what you can do about it. Before we can talk about why the middle class is disappearing, we need to agree on what it actually is, because middle class is one of the most used and least defined phrases in Canadian public life. The OECD, the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, defines the middle class as households earning between 75% and 200% of the median household income. Based on statistics, Canada's most recent data, the median after-tax household income in Canada is approximately $70,500. Applying the OECD definition, lower bound of middle class, $70,500 times 75%, equals approximately $52,875 per year. Upper bound of middle class, $70,500 times 200% equals approximately $141,000 per year. That's a wide range, and that range includes the working professional earning $70,000 and the dual-income household earning $130,000. Here's why that matters. The middle class is not a homogeneous group. It contains people who are building meaningful wealth, and people who feel like they're falling behind despite earning what used to be a comfortable income. And the data confirms that feeling is real, not a perception, not a mindset problem, not too much social media. For 20 years, Statistics Canada data shows median wages grew slower than consumer prices broadly, resulting in reduced real purchasing power. The policy options analysis published February 2026 was unambiguous. The cost of living crisis is structural. Wage stagnation, precarious employment, growing housing unaffordability. These are not individual failings. They are systemic realities. The government's own response confirmed the scale of the problem. PM Mark Carney's proposed middle-class tax cut in May 2025, reducing the lowest federal income tax bracket from 15% to 14%, was projected to save a two-income family up to $840 per year in 2026. Nearly 22 million Canadians would benefit, $840 per year, while grocery bills rose $1,000 per year, while housing costs consume 54% of pre-tax income for new buyers, while the wealth gap hits record highs every quarter. The tax cut didn't fix the structural problem. It acknowledged it exists. Your action step: calculate your own position on the OECD middle class scale. Take your household's total after-tax income and divide by $70,500. If the result is between 0.75 and 2.0, you are by definition middle class. Then ask yourself, does your financial reality match what that classification is supposed to feel like? Here is the core of this video. The middle class isn't disappearing because Canadians got lazy. It's disappearing because four structural forces are working simultaneously against anyone who earns a wage and doesn't own significant assets. Force 1. Housing has become unaffordable for the middle. The national homeownership affordability ratio reached 54% of pre-tax household income in 2024, up from 39% in 2019, according to CMHC. A household earning $93,000, the median, needs to spend 54% of its pre-tax income just to carry the average Canadian home. The traditional affordability threshold is 30%. The middle class was built on home ownership. The home was the primary vehicle for middle-class wealth accumulation, stable, appreciating, and accessible. Today, it is accessible primarily to those who already have wealth, either through high incomes, parental gifts, or existing equity. Young households could be opting out of home ownership entirely due to cost of living pressures, according to TD Economics' March 2026 analysis. The wealth transfer mechanism that built the middle class is breaking down. Force 2. Wage growth that doesn't keep up. While national average income data looks acceptable on paper, the picture changes dramatically when you separate median from mean. Top-income households saw disposable income grow at 7.7% in Q1 2025. The bottom 20% saw average wages edge down minus 0.7%, the widest gap since 1999. For some 20 years, Statistics Canada data show median wages grew slower than consumer prices broadly, resulting in reduced real purchasing power. Precarious employment, temporary, involuntary, part-time, gig, and platform-based work has become a permanent feature of the labor market. The middle class was built on stable, long-term employment, with defined benefits and predictable income. That model is eroding. Force 3. The investment elevator only goes up for some. The wealthy ride the upward investment elevator, gaining tens or hundreds of thousands in passive income each year. Ordinary workers ride a downward elevator, facing slow wage growth while carrying heavy mortgage and debt burdens. The mechanism is mathematical. The top 20% households had a savings rate of 12.7% in Q1 2025. They invested that savings in financial markets, which in 2023 returned plus 24.23%, and in 2024 returned plus 23.31%. The middle class, with a savings rate close to the national average of 4.4%, and most of that savings in cash or low-yield products, did not participate meaningfully in those returns. The result? Only the wealthy outperformed the average. Low- and middle-income groups effectively became poorer in relative terms. Force 4. Debt is consuming the middle class's margin. Precarious employment has become a permanent feature of the labor market. The average Canadian household debt-to-income ratio is 174.67%. For middle-income earners, specifically, statistics. Canada Q3 2025 data shows net saving worsened the most for middle-income households, due mainly to weak wage gains. Statistics. Canada data shows that median households had no savings left after paying mortgages and interest. Many fell into negative savings. When debt consumes all margin, there is nothing left to invest. And without investment, there is no participation in the compounding wealth that is lifting the top 20% further ahead every year. Your action step. Identify which of these four forces is having the greatest impact on your household right now. The right countermove is different depending on the primary force. The strategy section of this video addresses each one. Here's the data that proves this is not a temporary blip. It is a structural trend that has been compounding for years. The income gap has grown every single year since the pandemic. Now, here's the mechanism that drives the wealth gap even faster than the income gap. The wealth gap, measuring the difference in net worth share between the top 20% and the bottom 40%, grew to 62.7 percentage points at the end of 2025. This grew because financial markets gained strongly throughout 2025, and only the top households own meaningful financial market assets. The S&P 500 returned approximately 17.7% in 2025. A household in the top 20% with $500,000 in financial assets gained approximately $88,500 in wealth from market returns alone in a single year without working for it. A middle-income household with $20,000 in a GIC at 4% gained approximately $800 in the same year. Same economy, same year. $88,500 versus $800 in passive wealth gains. The mechanism isn't luck or intelligence, it's asset ownership. The wealthy own the assets that grow. The middle class owns the debt that doesn't. And the precarious employment trend compounds this further. Precarious employment, temporary, involuntary, part-time, gig, and platform-based jobs, has become a permanent feature of the labor market. Gig workers have no employer pension, no benefits, and no income security, while being classified as independent contractors who carry all the risk of employment without any of its protections. The erosion of stable employment directly attacks the foundation on which the middle class was built. 67% of Canadians say the cost of living feels as bad as it ever has, according to an Abacus data survey cited in TD Economics' March 2026 analysis. That is not a perception problem. That is a lived reality confirmed by the structural data. Your action step. Track the income gap number quarterly. Statistics Canada releases DHEA data every 3 months. If the gap is growing, the urgency of the 3 moves in the final segment of this video increases. This is not a problem that resolves itself. It requires a deliberate counter-strategy. Here's the most important reframe in this video. The disappearance of the middle class is a structural problem. It is driven by policy decisions, asset inflation, wage structure changes, and financial market dynamics that are largely outside any individual's control. But here's what is equally true. Understanding the structure of the problem is the first step to building a personal strategy that works within it, and in some cases, works around it. The data tells us exactly what separates households that are building wealth from those that are falling behind. It is not intelligence, it is not connections, it is not luck, it is savings rate and asset ownership. In Q1 2025, the top 20% of Canadian households had a savings rate of 12.7%. They invested that savings in financial markets. The markets gained dramatically. Their wealth compounded. The middle class had a savings rate close to the national average of 4.4%, and most of that savings was held in cash, GICs, or low-yield products. They did not participate in the market gains that drove the wealth gap wider. Now here's the counterintuitive insight from the TD Economics March 2026 analysis. Low-wealth households grew their net worth faster than their wealthier counterparts in the period from 2019 to 2023. precisely because lower-income households were forced to build equity in real estate during a period of dramatic home price appreciation. The mechanism of wealth building is not unique to the wealthy. It is available to anyone who owns assets that appreciate. The question is, which assets, accessed through which accounts, at which cost? And here's the most actionable insight from all the data. The top 20% savings rate of 12.7% is not 12.7% because they earn more. It is 12.7% because they treat savings as a non-negotiable first allocation, before lifestyle spending, and they direct those savings toward appreciating assets, not cash. A middle-income household earning $93,000 and saving 12.7% instead of 4.4% would save approximately $7,900 more per year than the national average. Invested at 8% annual return in a TFSA over 20 years, that $7,900 additional annual saving becomes approximately $388,000 more in wealth. Same income, different savings rate, different asset allocation. $388,000, different outcome. Your action step. Calculate your current savings rate. Take everything you saved and invested in the past 12 months and divide by your gross income. If the answer is below 10%, the gap between your trajectory and the top 20% is measurable and closable. Here are the 3 moves. Each one is directly derived from what the data shows separates the households building wealth from the households falling behind, in the same economic environment. Move 1. Raise your savings rate to 10% minimum. Automate it. The single most powerful lever any middle-income Canadian has is their savings rate. Not their investment picks, not their timing, their savings rate. The top 20% save 12.7% of gross income. The national average is 4.4%. The gap between those two numbers, compounded over 20 years at 8%, is the wealth gap in miniature. On a $93,000 household income, 4.4% saved, $4,092 per year to $202,000 over 20 years at 8%. 12.7% saved, $11,811 per year to $583,000 over 20 years at 8%. The difference between the national average and the top 20% savings rate on the same income is $381,000 in wealth over 20 years. That is the savings rate gap, closing the wealth gap in a single household. Automate the target savings rate on the day your paycheck arrives, not what's left over. First, move 2. Get off the wage elevator and onto the investment elevator. Wages are growing slower than inflation for middle-income earners. The wage elevator is going down in real terms. The investment elevator, financial markets, gained 17.7% in 2025. 23.31% in 2024, and 24.23% in 2023. You cannot get on the investment elevator without investable assets. That's the barrier. But the TFSA removes every tax drag from the return, making a $7,000 annual TFSA contribution in a low-cost S&P 500 ETF, the most powerful single move available to any Canadian who hasn't used it. $7,000 per year in a TFSA at 10% average annual return. 10 years, $123,000. 20 years, $440,000. Tax-free. From the same $7,000 annual contribution that the government allows every Canadian to shelter. The investment elevator is not exclusive to the wealthy. It's available to anyone with a TFSA and the discipline to invest in it, instead of leaving it in cash where it earns 3% and loses ground to inflation. Move 3. Build income that doesn't require your hours. The middle class is primarily dependent on earned income. Income that requires showing up, performing, and exchanging time for dollars. That model is directly vulnerable to every structural force attacking the middle class. Wage stagnation, precarious employment, automation, and economic disruption. The top 20% earn from multiple directions simultaneously. Investment income, dividend income, rental income, equity appreciation, income that arrives whether they work or not. Building even one additional income stream, dividend income from a $50,000 TFSA portfolio at 4.5% yield generates $2,250 per year tax-free. Starts the transition from pure wage dependence to a more resilient financial structure. That $2,250 per year doesn't replace a salary, but it means a portion of your income is no longer vulnerable to job loss, illness, recession, or the structural wage stagnation that has eroded the middle class for 20 years. The transition from wage-only income to wage-plus passive income is the defining financial move of our generation. Every dollar of passive income is a dollar that can't be taken away by a layoff notice. Your action step this week. Calculate your current savings rate. Set a target of 10% minimum. Open your TFSA if unused. Check your contribution room in CRA, My Account. Make your first or next ETF purchase. One fund, one decision. Automate it monthly. Let's come back to where we started. April 13, 2026. Statistics, Canada. The income gap at 46.7 percentage points. Widest since 1999. The top 20% holding 65.7% of Canada's net worth. The bottom 40% holding 3%. The wealth gap at 62.7 percentage points and growing. These numbers are real. The structural forces driving them are real. The 20 years of wage stagnation relative to inflation is real. The housing affordability crisis is real. The precarious employment reality is real. And here is what is equally real. The top 20% savings rate is 12.7%. The national average is 4.4%. That gap, not the income gap, not the wealth gap, is the most actionable number in this entire video. Because it's the one number a Canadian individual can actually change. On a $93,000 median household income, closing the savings rate gap from 4.4% to 12.7%, and directing it to a TFSA in a low-cost S&P 500 ETF at 8% over 20 years produces $381,000 more in wealth on the same income. Tax-free. That doesn't close the structural wealth gap between the top 20% and the rest. Nothing a single individual does will fix a systemic problem, but it changes your personal trajectory, from participating in the disappearance of the middle class to opting out of it. The middle class was built on a promise: work hard, earn a stable income, buy a home, and your financial security will compound over time. That promise has eroded for structural reasons that are documented and undeniable. But the investment elevator still runs. The TFSA is still open. The S&P 500 has still averaged nearly 10% annually for nearly 100 years. The compound interest math still works the same way it always has. The system is broken. The math still works. Raise your savings rate. Get on the investment elevator. Build income that doesn't require your hours. That's how you stop disappearing with the middle class and start building toward the side of the ledger where the numbers are working for you.